That was the first thing that like popped into my mind when he said electrical was like generator, but I don't. I just. Oh goodness.
Room, time shot.
Thank you. So goodness. Yeah, Ritz, I was super excited, so I needed to share.
Cool.
It's so warm in here. Since he called me this morning, I didn't have time to put it. He's like, I need to be dressed. Like, it looks like you're doing
all good.
Thanks.
Candy's here, Lane's here, Lewis. And
Yeah.
Ritz. Here. Schultz. Here. Schweitzer, saw you, Shepard, saw you, Snozzle. Ryan.
I didn't have to say it.
Alrighty, so last week we started, I guess first just a few admin notes. So we're not going to start briefings next week. We're going to wrap up Korea and our intro to the Cold War lesson next week. The week after, though, we will shoot to do half of your briefings. And that is also the day, that's the Wednesday right before Thanksgiving, that's the day your talking papers are due. Remember, those are talking papers per that tongue and quill. If you have any questions on it, let me know. But it's if you go on the homecenter.com website, same place you get the readings. There's the document, tongue and quill. Basically, what the talking paper is, and what I can pull out next week. We can go over a little bit more. It's just an outline for your paper. So kind of exposing you to the kind of Air Force style of writing that you could be doing down the road.
You make it with your briefing?
It's going to be due the first day of briefings for everybody, just to be fair. So some people aren't getting an extra week.
But it is about your briefing.
Yeah, same topic as your
Just an
briefing.
outline for your briefing.
Yep. So it should help you with that. So any questions about that? Then 3 to 5 minutes for the briefing. Have slides.
All of our topics are clear.
Yep, everybody's topics are cleared. If anybody wants to change your topic, let me know. But thankfully, we don't have 20 of the same briefings coming your way. So, and for those of you who may have kind of chosen topics for stuff that we already kind of covered in class, just really try to go beyond what we talked about. It's fine to hit on some of that stuff, but the idea here is that you can kind of study something in further depth, learn something new, teach the class something new, get that big bang for your buck. Paying a lot of money to go to college, so, or the Air Force is paying a lot of money for something. Okay, any questions about any of that? All right, so last week we started talking about the Berlin airlift. Initially, kind of what were some of the main causes of the Berlin, what led to the blockade of West Berlin.
Soviets and the United States fighting over which currency to use.
Okay, so that was kind of what sparked it. Obviously, kind of Cold War tensions starting up. So we started airlift into the city. Initially, was it going so well? Okay, just like everything, nothing goes well when you start. But then you insert a great leader such as Hunter, Willie the Whip. And what did he do to improve the situation? Okay, he organized it.
Didn't you get bigger planes?
Okay, he requested more planes. So initially, which ones were we using? Okay, and then which ones did he bring in? Oh my goodness, you're all so smart. Larger capacity. Anybody remember some of the other actions kind of he took? A lot of them kind of mentioned in the video.
They ended up building another airport.
Okay, which was actually closer. And actually, Berliners were actually helping build that, so that's kind of a neat fact. Lewis?
He did the thing where the planes go and they come past the line.
Okay, and if they couldn't land, what'd they do? Okay, who would want to be that guy or gal?
They started using a British air base in the British sector because it was a third closer.
Okay, very good. So, kind of centralized it, and very much like you had seen him in the China, Burma, India theater of World War II. Tunner was very hands-on. He got out there talking to the troops, flew the route himself, kind of got to see what his guys were up against. So of course, things got better. We started bringing in record numbers of cargo. You may remember the Easter offensive. Easter, did they have a nice ham family dinner? No, they had a record-setting day. Just remember that. We may do that Thanksgiving. All hands on deck. We're gonna do something special. I'm just kidding. I'm not coming in on Thanksgiving. So. All right. So there you see some big numbers by the end. So as a result, I think we were successful. Okay, yeah. Just a surprise ending for y'all. West Berlin did not fall to the Soviets. Remained in Allied hands for the remainder of the Cold War. We're going to talk about some kind of air power related results of the Berlin airlift. We already watched this video, so we're not going to rewatch the Tunner video.
Something kind of fun is that November 9th of this year was the 25th anniversary of the fall of the wall in Berlin.
Very good. Did you see that on a news story on Facebook the other day? Okay, very good.
This is my German class.
Yes.
On the anniversary on the 9th, some Palestinian teenagers they were trying to tear down some of the walls in Tel Aviv or something, in protest. So.
We're going to talk about it here in a minute, but Berlin kind of became the symbol of kind of freedom within the Cold War. But a few results. The Berlin airlift became a powerful diplomatic weapon and represented a remarkable technical achievement. Through the combined efforts of British and American pilots, the airlift delivered more than 2 million tons of cargo to West Berlin, successfully supplying the besieged city entirely by air and rendering the Soviet blockade ineffective. So kind of for the first time in history, air power had kept a cut-off surrounded city thriving. Not only a cut-off surrounded, starving out city, but really, a city that had been devastated. They were still very much in the rebuilding phase after World War II. And secondly, the air operation, conducted on a scale never before attempted and backed by the nuclear deterrent power of the U.S. Air Force, demonstrated how air power can secure a diplomatic advantage without going to war. So kind of that diplomatic tool. Yes, bringing in all those supplies and everything was humanitarian, but what was kind of the backbone, if you will? What was our bite if we had to?
Didn't they have a couple of wings of B-29s in Germany or in Germany?
Yep, very good. So in England, we had a couple squadrons of B-29 bombers, obviously nuclear capable bombers. Kind of that backhanded threat to have in case things went south. Militarily speaking, we kind of had the overwhelming air power in the region. However, Soviet troops numbered, I think, in East Germany around 1.5 million, and we had about 18,000 in West Germany. We had kind of gone through a mass kind of demilitarization in Europe post World War II. So, obviously, airports kind of played a huge role. And we even kind of see that today with the Air Force, as well as the Navy. We're going to talk about the Air Force. It's kind of the show of force tours, if you will. So, when things, kind of countries start acting up around the world, we may reposition bomber squadrons or fighter squadrons, or maybe carrier groups, for Navy folk, just kind of in position to kind of strengthen our posture, against maybe potential enemies, Iran, Korea, those kind of folks. So, summer 2010, it was Iraq, Afghanistan were still going pretty heavy. So we didn't have as strong of a position, troops from all over the world kind of deploying to go support those two wars. And pretty much about a year or two earlier, F-22 units and B-52 bomber units kind of were getting sent out to the Pacific to kind of fill that void. So, we didn't have a couple divisions of Army soldiers or Marines. we can bring in more air power to the region to kind of help keep that balance of power, help keep that footprint out in the Far East. So that was where I went summer 2010 to Guam. So nice sunny place. Okay, and then just kind of a fun note, Berlin kind of became the symbol of freedom, in Europe. It's still, West Berlin was still kind of that island in kind of behind the Iron Curtain. Remember that was about 100 miles into East Germany. Soviets did lift the blockade, but again, 1961, the Soviets, East Germans built the Berlin Wall. Kind of became that symbol of the Cold War. And there's just a picture from the 60s of East German soldier defecting. Even a couple presidents made a couple famous speeches. You may remember from your American history classes, at or around the Berlin Wall. Anybody remember any of those presidents?
JFK.
What was it?
So JFK said, "Ich bin ein Berliner."
And what does that mean?
Well, it's incorrect way to say that I'm a Berliner, like a person from Berlin. But
what does it also mean?
Like the way you said it, you'd be like a food item from Berlin, such as a jelly filled donut, like heavy sausage or something.
So I have a jelly donut. True story, but the crowds there in Berlin, did they care?
No, they got it.
No, they got it. They were wild with applause, raging like yes, it was basically saying we were all Berliners. It was a play off of an old Roman saying, I believe, from the Roman Empire days. Just saying like we are all citizens of the world. Berlin, we stand behind you. And then kind of more contemporary times, at least campaign times, while we're alive. You have what president? Okay, what did he say? Do it in your best Reagan voice.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
Okay, very good. So that sounded just like Reagan. Very proud of it. So again, kind of became the symbol of the Cold War. So the Berlin blockade did end on 19 May 1949. So basically went from June 48 to May 1949. But the Allies did keep delivering until September. Allied prestige was at a new high. And as a result, the Allies formed NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, to defend against future Soviet coercion and aggression. Berlin became the symbol of freedom. Multinational rule of the city ended. West Berlin became part of the Federal Republic of Germany. So, the new free Germany. The Germany not behind the Iron Curtain. Just kind of mentioned it last week, in the initial days of the Berlin airlift. Anybody remember who the American commander in Europe was? The United States Air Force's Europe commander?
LeMay.
Yep, very good. So we're going to kind of talk about LeMay and his transition from the United States Air Force's Europe commander to the Strategic Air Command. So who wants to be LeMay? Y'all want to be LeMay. Schweitzer smiling the most. Kelly wants it.
Read it.
Please.
I don't mind being called tough, since I find in this racket it's tough guys who lead the survivors.
All right, very good.
Colonel
All the cadets, y'all probably say that quote in your sleep because you have to know it, and you embrace it. So we're gonna watch our second video installment on LeMay. And his role kind of in the early days of the Cold War.
Major General LeMay became the first Deputy Chief of Air Staff for Research and Development at Air Force Headquarters in Washington in December 1945. He was in charge of nuclear weapons development and wasted no time in planning the weapons testing in the Marshall Islands Bikini Atoll. LeMay promoted to lieutenant general in October 1947 and assigned as commanding general for U.S. Air Forces in Europe. In April 1948, the Soviets began to restrict the flow of supplies to Berlin, prompting General Lucius Clay, the commander of European Command, to ask LeMay if he could deliver coal by air. LeMay responded, "Sir, the Air Force can deliver anything." LeMay immediately began the Little Lift from Rhine, Maine, West Germany, to deliver U.S. Army rations and perishables like fresh milk, eggs, and vegetables daily into Tempelhof Aerodrome Field in Berlin. LeMay organized the air operation and ordered more modern aircraft. Until they arrived, he had to rely on the 96 Douglas C-47s already assigned to Germany. Then on June 26, the Soviets closed the city completely except for the air quarters. The Berlin airlift began. With the airlift flowing efficiently, LeMay returned to the United States, was promoted to general, and assumed command of the newly formed Strategic Air Command. He established its headquarters at Offutt Air Force Base, Nebraska. He transformed the command from the remnants of World War II bombers, primarily the B-29 Super Fortress and the larger consolidated B-36 Peacemaker intercontinental bomber, to an all-jet bomber force, comprised of the sleek Boeing B-47 Stratojet and the awesome Boeing B-52 Stratofortress, manned and supported by professional airmen dedicated to the preservation of peace. As the new Boeing bombers came into service, LeMay quickly checked out in both the B-47 and the B-52. General LeMay commanded the Strategic Air Command for nearly 9 years. He was uniquely identified with SAC and its progress, and also with the welfare of its people. He realized that by demanding high standards of readiness, the command exacted a human toll on its people. Being a strong family man, General LeMay had a great concern for his men and their families' welfare, and over the years was responsible for greatly improved living conditions on SAC bases for both married and unmarried personnel. Under LeMay's leadership and supervision, SAC laid the plans for the development and integration of an intercontinental ballistic missile capability to complement the manned bomber. In July 1957, LeMay became the Vice Chief of Staff of the United States Air Force. But even as Vice Chief of Staff, General LeMay continued to set records. In November of 1957, he flew a new Boeing KC-135 jet tanker on 2 record-setting non-stop flights between the United States and Buenos Aires, Argentina, and returned. Then, in 1961, LeMay replaced General Thomas D. White and was named the 5th Chief of Staff of the Air Force, a post he held until his retirement in January 1965. As Chief of Staff, General LeMay remained committed to the welfare and professionalism of the men and women of the Air Force.
He was a happy blend of a guy who didn't have to be a martinet to get absolute loyalty from those who served under him, which is the ultimate accolade of a military commander, or of any kind of commander for that matter. He gets pretty high marks as a human being. You know, he was a cigar-chopping, rough Kurt LeMay, and over the years, this mystique grew up about him as if he were some sort of ogre, you know, with a crushed cap squared over his eyes and thunderbolting everyone around him. Well, not really. You know, the beauty of him was that he had that effect in terms of what he got out of his troops, but he didn't actually hurl the thunderbolts. It's kind of a strange sort of thing. He got the kind of loyalty that a guy, you know, you would expect a commander to get if he intimidated his troops, but he never did intimidate them.
He also remained the chief advocate of the policy for the continued mix of strategic manned bombers and intercontinental ballistic missiles as the nation's primary deterrent to nuclear attack, when the administration pressed for a change in that policy. After his retirement, his concern over declines in national defense capabilities and the ongoing war in Vietnam prompted the general to join George Wallace as his vice presidential running mate in the 1972 presidential race.
Did they win?
In 1987, the general and Mrs. Curtis E. LeMay Foundation was set up by the general and his wife to provide assistance to indigent widows of retired Air Force officers and enlisted retirees. General LeMay died in 1990, but his legacy lives on. He changed forever the way nations use bombers as an offensive weapon during war and as a source of deterrence against attack during times of peace. His creation of the Strategic Air Command as a deterrent to nuclear attack during the Cold War helped defeat the Soviet Union and brought peace and an end to the threat of nuclear annihilation. Although he is remembered for his tough, war-winning leadership, his legacy is one of peace. And for that, he is a true legend of air power.
So if you tell by the end of that video, that's our last video. Moment of silence for general. All right, so we're going to kind of go through some of the high points of General LeMay's career. I already talked about a lot of them, kind of with the with World War II, a little bit with the Berlin airlift. But anybody remember last week's video where he started his Air Force career, how he got his commission into the Air Force?
Ohio State University.
Okay, through what program?
ROTC.
Okay, very good. So, just like all of you at a Big Ten university, through ROTC. And unfortunately for him, at a lesser university than some of us went to. So after World War II, he commanded units in the Berlin airlift initially, before taking over as commander of the Strategic Air Command. So Strategic Air Command, kind of in today's terms, there is no Strategic Air Command. Anybody want to hazard a guess what command has kind of replaced Strategic Air Command?
That's like global strike.
Okay, very good. So yeah, Global Strike Command has, in a sense, kind of replaced Strategic Air Command. So Global Strike Command kind of encompasses our entire nuclear force for the Air Force. So that's our nuclear bombers, so our B-52s and B-2s, as well as our intercontinental ballistic missiles. So, Offutt Air Force Base, Nebraska, still a base. Still kind of houses a lot of that command and control though for the nuclear mission, kind of more of the joint nuclear mission. So we have a strategic command there. That's like a 4-star billet, and basically they kind of would be like the command kind of carrying out those orders of the president. So that 4-star commander there, typically they're a Navy or Air Force commander. They would kind of be in charge of like running that nuclear war if doomsday were to fall upon us. So Offutt Air Force Base, Nebraska. If any of you want to go get stationed there, anybody want to go to Nebraska? Here it's nice this time of year. Anybody watch Walking Dead? Remember Rick? I hear Nebraska's nice. Yeah, very good. Or you need to watch TV. Just kidding. Study hard. Keep focused on your grades. Okay. And you saw in the video, LeMay would later serve as 5th Air Force Chief of Staff from 1961 to 1965, kind of in the early years, the lead-up years to major U.S. involvement in Vietnam. He was gruff and tough-minded. His personality did not give a real good clue, though, to how much he truly cared about his airmen. So, kind of saw it in the previous weeks with World War II. Really kind of did what he could to help take care of his troops. Would never ask them to do anything that he wouldn't do. Improve living facilities, both for his troops in World War II and then the men and women under his command in Strategic Air Command. He always vowed to drive his men hard, but he also promised to never send troops into combat unless they were properly trained, equipped, and ready. We kind of saw that, even helping out with their work rest cycles within Strategic Air Command, but even they talked about base housing for both single and married members within the command. So those kind of things can really help out with morale and help get the job done. As commander, he followed three main principles he believed would best motivate his troops to accomplish the mission. And his three basically tenets, if you will, of leadership were that each person in the unit must understand the importance of his or her job, no matter how small. Secondly, commanders must establish and communicate goals and must show progress towards those goals in order to keep morale high. And lastly, commanders must recognize and show a real appreciation for those who accomplish their assigned task. So simply put, everybody should know their job. Commanders must communicate goals and help establish realistic goals. And third, recognize your people. So three pretty basic leadership principles. Hopefully, don't talk a whole lot of leadership principles in this class. We can talk a lot about it more next year in the 300 class. But definitely, kind of take those words of wisdom from LeMay to heart. Kind of remember that as you go forth on active duty. Okay. Under General LeMay, Strategic Air Command implemented procedures to ensure a high standard of readiness and a high alert rate. Alert rate means kind of aircraft ready to go to war. That means they're gassed up, loaded, kind of ready to go. They would basically have pilots just sitting on standby, ready to run out on the flight line, hop in the cockpits, fire the engines, and go. That's not all that different from kind of alert we do nowadays. Really kind of since September 11th, 2001, we've kind of had strategically positioned aircraft, fighter aircraft kind of positioned, on our coasts and even kind of around major U.S. cities, kind of ready to respond if there was kind of another terrorist threat. So the 115th Fighter Wing over at Truax, they actually have a couple aircraft that take turns along with other fighter units kind of around the Midwest for that alert mission, just ready to call scramble, take off, and intercept the threat. And lastly, with regards to Strategic Air Command, under General LeMay, Strategic Air Command bombers began flying airborne nuclear alert missions. Loaded with nuclear bombs and flying peacetime orbits, they were ready to fly to the Soviet Union in a moment's notice. So we had a couple different routes for that. We basically had a western route where basically aircraft were just flying in a huge orbit. We actually had a northern route kind of going over the North Pole, ready just to reach out and strike targets within the Soviet Union. Kind of in summary, at a time when America's foreign policy relied on her nuclear strike capability, General LeMay's Strategic Air Command made the United States the most powerful nation on Earth. Nuclear deterrence became a political reality, largely on the strength of Curtis LeMay's leadership. Although many think his methods were extreme, the global political environment of the 1950s contributed to a climate of fear within the United States. In addition, because of the seriousness of the nuclear mission, there was and is no room for error in that mission. So, really, kind of after World War II, military really shrunk down. We had this new great weapon of war, nuclear weapons. The thought was that deterrence could help contain the Soviet Union and thwart any threats. So, this was kind of our main weapon of foreign policy. Yes, we did get involved in some smaller wars, Korea, Vietnam, and other conflicts we're going to talk about later this semester or next semester. But largely during the Cold War, this kind of was the backbone of our foreign policy. Okay, so all the while, General LeMay is building up Strategic Air Command. Things are heating up again for the Cold War, this time on the Korean Peninsula. So, World War II ends. Anybody kind of know history of Korea? You know, what happened to the Korean Peninsula? Who held it before and during the war? And how it was divided after the war?
Wasn't China like in control of it before the war, and then Korea like wanted to gain back their own control, so then the North started to take over?
Okay, part of that.
So, Japan had it during the war, and I guess we made their own country after the war.
Okay, very good. So yeah, just kind of during the war, Japan had controlled it. In the aftermath of the war, we talked about it a few weeks ago. You know, the U.S. kind of didn't want Russia to get involved in the Pacific theater of the war. Unfortunately, they did. I think they snuck in with about a week or two left in the war. So they actually, kind of for the sake of ease, we divided Korea along the 38th parallel. Soviets controlled the north, we controlled the south, just to kind of help facilitate elections and the rebuilding process. However, that 38th parallel kind of became more permanent than anybody realized, even today. So we're going to watch a quick video. Really does a good job introducing Korea once the computer unfreezes. There we go. And we'll discuss.
By the end of World War II, Korea had been ruled ruthlessly by Japan for more than 40 years. America and the Soviet Union divided at the 38th parallel as a convenient way to accept the surrender of the Japanese forces. The Soviet Union created the People's Democratic Republic of Korea, north of the parallel. South of the parallel, free elections were held to create the Republic of Korea. Separate trends were established on each side of the parallel. In South Korea, all of the occupying U.S. troops, except for a small advisory force, had left by July 1949. In contrast, China had provided North Korea with training with many regular army units, hardened in the long and recent Chinese Civil War. The Soviet Union equipped the North Korean army with first-rate weapons. On June 25, 1950, the North Korean army swarmed over the 38th parallel and marched to the sea, intending to conquer and annex South Korea. President Truman ordered the old warhorse, General Douglas MacArthur, to take the necessary military action to defend Korea. MacArthur was keenly aware how long it would take to get American forces on the ground into action. He called on the Far Eastern Air Force to hit the North Koreans with everything they had. It wasn't much. 8 combat squadrons were sent into action. 2 were Douglas B-26 light bombers. The only modern aircraft were Lockheed F-80 jet fighters. Their targets were anything of military value, from Seoul north to the 38th parallel. B-29s from Okinawa soon joined in, and for the next 6 days, these few aircraft prevented a Dunkirk-style retreat for American forces. The sheer momentum of the North Korean attack had worked. It compressed the remnants of the Republic of Korea's army and the U.S. contingent in the perimeter around Busan. 150,000 North Korean troops, organized into 13 rifle divisions, a tank brigade, a mechanized division, and a tank division, threatened the Busan perimeter. Defending the perimeter were 5 badly mauled and demoralized Republic of Korea divisions and a Marine brigade. The F-80 jet fighters couldn't operate from the unimproved South Korean airfields, so 6 squadrons of the venerable North American F-51 Mustang were introduced, refugees from storage depots. Squadrons that had just converted to F-80 jets found themselves going into combat with Mustangs on a day's notice.
Those were the same Mustangs from World War II. We changed designation for fighter aircraft from P-51 to F-51, so it's kind of like F-15s, F-16s, F-22s nowadays. That was kind of when we changed over to the F designation.
The F-51s were launched time and time again to keep the North Korean forces in check. They were directed by forward air controllers, flying low and slow. F-80s continued to operate from Japan, flying at the very limits of their range and returning with absolutely minimum fuel. The pace of the war increased steadily. The 5th Air Force, led by Major General Earl C. Partridge, demonstrated the flexibility of air power by its quick reaction to target changes. Sometimes a mission would be diverted en route to the new target in response to an Army request. The 8th Army commander, Lieutenant General Walton H. Walker, later stated for the record that he could not have stayed in Korea without the 5th Air Force support. The tide turned rapidly. On July 24th, General MacArthur had assumed the duties of Commander-in-Chief, United Nations Command. On September 15th, he launched a daring Incheon invasion, which began to rout the North Korean forces. Incheon was in many ways reminiscent of June 6, 1944, D-Day in France. Lieutenant General George E. Stratemeyer directed his 4th Eastern Air Force to fly reconnaissance. This was partly to determine the high and low tide heights of seawalls that would have to be scaled. Then Stratemeyer began an interdiction campaign to take out enemy rail lines, bridges, and tunnels to isolate the area. U.S. fighters roamed over North Korean airfields to suppress enemy aircraft. The Navy and Marines provided close air support for the invasion. Meanwhile, in a coordinated effort in the South, B-29s laid down a carpet bombing attack. It helped the 8th Army break out of the bridgehead at Busan and sweep north. The weather began to clear, and the 5th Air Force mounted more and more close support sorties. They used rockets and napalm to break communist resistance. At the same time, there was a successful strategic bombing campaign. In a single month, 4 Eastern Air Force Bomber Command B-29s destroyed North Korea's capacity to support its troops in the field. It was a tribute to the methods Curtis LeMay had instilled in his crews. Chinese aerial opposition stiffened. The B-29s were forced to turn to night bombing. It continued for the remainder of the war. 167,100 tons of bombs dropped in 21,328 combat sorties. It was a major effort by a force that never exceeded 100 aircraft. On October 20th, 1950, one of the most successful parachute operations in history helped bottle up the retreating communist forces. C-119s and C-47s of Combat Cargo Command dropped 2,860 paratroopers and 300 tons of equipment to straddle the main roads north of Pyongyang. The North Korean troops fled their strongly fortified positions. They were pursued by elements of the 8th Army that were being supplied almost totally by airlift. The Chinese warned that they would intervene. General MacArthur assured President Truman that they would not. He based his assumptions in part on the fact that the Chinese had no air force. It was a fateful, near fatal conclusion.
All right, so as you saw in the video, on June 25th, 1950, North Koreans launched a surprise attack against South Korea. The United Nations passed several resolutions condemning the invasion. The Soviets at that time were actually boycotting the UN, so they couldn't really say or do anything to veto that. But when the United Nations authorized troops to be sent to defend South Korea, the United States took the lead. Okay, and then National Security Council Directive 68, that was a couple months prior to, that was kind of when we were introducing our doctrine of containment, containing communism around the world. So as you saw at the beginning, there it is, June 25th, up there. The war featured a North Korean bid to win quickly. The Air Force was able to help UN forces form a defensive perimeter around the southern port of Busan by attacking the advancing North Koreans. So with this map here, Busan perimeter is that kind of southeast corner there of South Korea. So that's how far south and east basically all of the South Korean and American forces were pushed basically immediately at the start of the conflict. However, in September, the United Nations launched a counteroffensive with the breakout at Busan perimeter and the brilliant landings at Incheon under General MacArthur. So that was kind of those that D-Day style invasion. I'll show you where that's at, but Incheon, we got a good map coming up. It's kind of over on the west side here. So we took basically a bunch of forces from Japan, and even pulled some of our forces out of the Busan perimeter and invaded the west side of occupied South Korea. And after the invasions in Incheon, the United Nations forces soon crossed into North Korea and advanced towards the Chinese border. And in November 1950, even though General MacArthur thought they wouldn't invade, who invaded? Okay, the Chinese. That kind of pushed us back below the 38th parallel. It was more or less kind of a stalemate. There was a little bit of north-south movement kind of on both ends. But really, for the next 2 years of the war, pretty much a stalemate. I'll show you the map here. Just thinking.
Did the video say that the South Koreans and Chinese troops?
The South
Koreans, South Korean Chinese troops. North Koreans sent Russian weapons. Was that?
no,
Oh, okay, no. Okay.
I was like, I hope the Legends Air Power video wasn't wrong. This map kind of shows basically September 1950, how far south North Korea had gotten. And this is kind of post-invasion, post our invasion at Incheon and our breakout from the Busan perimeter. So we were actually able to push almost up to the Chinese border. Kind of hence their apprehension, thinking that maybe we were going a little further north. So remember, this was after China had gone red about a year prior. So Chinese were very apprehensive. I'm gonna watch next week. We'll save the next Hunter video. We're gonna show kind of how airlift helped us keep our troops resupplied at the Busan perimeter, as well as helped with airborne operations. And then learn more a little bit about the interdiction campaign next week as well. That supported our breakout and our push forward. So we'll end there for today, and we'll finish up pretty much all the material next week, and then the following 2 weeks will be briefings. The end of the semester is quickly approaching, but don't worry, this class is offered again next semester. All right, that's all I got for you all. Have a good week.